Geeks! I have a real-life Italian melodrama for you. The Italian Prime Minister Mario Draghi tried to resign last week when one of the political parties in his broad coalition refused to support him in a confidence vote. But the Italian president rejected his resignation, and Italy's mayors, business organizations, and union leaders all begged the prime minister to stay. So he stays. They do the confidence vote, and even though polls show that 70% of Italians support him, 3 political parties together decide to vote against him, likely to fight for their own power. So he decides to resign again, and it all feels like one of these super dramatic Italian operas to me. And I speak Italian, so I cannot lead this country anymore. Soffro e non credo che tu possa aiutarmi. No, non dirlo. Devi restare. Mamma mia, I refuse your resignation. You find a way to all get along. Per favore, ti preghiamo, resta. Do not leave us, you helped our economy. Ok, d'accordo, I will stay. Ma solo perché amo tutti voi e il mio paese. Non importa. It's a time for me to go. I think I might submit that to the Metropolitan Opera. We got a cool agenda today. We'll talk about the conclusion from Biden's Saudi visit, the FCC calling for a TikTok ban, the latest with Ukraine and Russia, Mexico capturing one of the most wanted drug lords, and a kid checkers champion who's helping Ukraine. Before we start though, please hit that subscribe button below, click the notification bell, and like this video. I got a lot of requests to summarize the end of Biden's trip to Saudi Arabia. As you can see from this photo, the trip didn't exactly start off on the right fist. I'm not gonna lie to you, I don't like this image. It's bad PR. And I know that in the moment, Biden was just doing a fist bump the way he does with every leader since the pandemic. But if you're gonna promise to never meet with the crown prince because he's a murderous thug, then maybe you should have your comms team force the Saudis to have the king greet the president instead of his bratty son. This trip was high risk, because no matter how you slice it, the optics don't look great. You're pandering to a murderer, and deep down you're going because of the high price of oil, which only makes it look like our human rights values can be sold for commercial interests. The United States also does a lot with Saudi Arabia, so it's unrealistic to think we would end this relationship. So if you're gonna go now, you better come out with some good results. So here are the outcomes, and you decide who won the Biden-MBS boxing match. First, the Saudis agreed to extend a ceasefire in Yemen for another 15 weeks, and they also pledged over $1 billion for development projects and fuel support there. Second, the Saudis also agreed to allow Israeli planes to fly over its territory, which sounds minor, but is actually important because that can shave off up to 3 hours from many of those flights. Third, this is a big one. The Saudis agreed to invest in US technology to build 5G and 6G. They're 6G now? Which to translate for you basically means they'll invest in our technology instead of China's. On oil, there was nothing concrete other than a general promise to, quote, support global oil market balancing. And then they had some other agreements in areas like climate change and renewable energy, in cybersecurity, space exploration, and health. I'm sorry, what was that? Did they come out with any human rights-related agreements? No. Biden said he told MBS he blames him for the murder of Washington Post columnist Jamal Khashoggi, which MBS denied because he legit doesn't care. I asked you all who you thought won the MBS-Biden boxing match, and 71% of you said MBS. I personally agree with you on this one. There were some good outcomes, but were they strong enough to merit such a high-risk trip? MBS proved to the world that if he just laid low for a while, eventually the US president would come crawling back and would forget about his promise never to meet with him. And that's a problem, because MBS might feel free to kill other dissidents in the future if he doesn't see too many consequences for his behavior. The commissioner of the Federal Communications Commission says the TikTok app should be removed from app stores because it poses a national security risk. This is a long story, so let me walk it back for you, and then I have an expert to help. TikTok is owned by a Chinese company called ByteDance, and generally, Chinese companies are at the mercy of the Chinese government. So if the government says, give me your information, the company usually has no choice. Because of this threat, President Trump tried to ban TikTok, and then he tried to make ByteDance sell its American business off a couple years ago. This ended up getting challenged in court, and so an agreement was reached where TikTok would store US information in physical data centers in the US owned by a company called Oracle. And that was meant to prove that information about US users is only stored here and not in China. That was until this explosive BuzzFeed article came out. Leaked audio from a whole bunch of TikTok meetings showed that private American user data, so things like your birthday and phone number, has been repeatedly and recently accessed by ByteDance's employees in China. TikTok says there's no security threat because the information isn't shared with the Chinese government and is subject to robust cybersecurity controls. So what does it all mean? I asked you all how you felt about TikTok staying, and 70% of you said you didn't really care. I like TikTok, but I also don't want the Chinese government in my phone. Hello? Hello, Hagar. Get on my phone, she. He's always trying to sell me. To help break this down, I brought on Kit Conklin, who is a vice president with Caron, which is a badass illicit finance research and data analytics firm. He is also a non-resident senior fellow at the Atlantic Council's Geotech Center. Hi, Kit. Thank you so much for joining me on Oh My World. I'm so excited to have you today.
Thanks for being here.
Oh, well, you come at the perfect time. I am a TikToker. I have benefited from this platform, but I'm a little concerned about this news that I'm hearing, and I don't totally know what it means. So, can you break down for us how significant is this security threat that the FCC is talking about with TikTok, and why does it matter?
So it's a great question. And for all of you that may not be familiar with why this is a big issue, the US government believes that because TikTok is owned by ByteDance, a Chinese company, that all of the data that's being recorded, filmed, stored, etc., by TikTok users will be accessible to the Chinese government. The US government believes this is a concern for national security purposes for a couple of different reasons. The first is that if that is true, the Chinese government would have access to children's data in the United States. So anything that a child posts on TikTok would be accessible to that foreign government, which creates all sorts of legal challenges and complications, not just if it was the Chinese government, for any government agency, right? Have access to that data is difficult. But why this matters from a national security perspective is all of the other data that's on TikTok. So when you're happy, when you're sad, when you're using TikTok to communicate with your friends, all of that information theoretically could be accessed by the Chinese government. And at its core, the reason why the Chinese government could be able to do that is the so-called 2017 National Security Act law, which states that Chinese companies must cooperate with the Chinese government, the intelligence services, and the police agencies, should they be asked to do so. So the US government is very concerned that all of the data on Americans, to include children, will be accessible via ByteDance in China for purposes that could be harmful for the average American citizen. So the US government is using two kind of key authorities to tackle this issue. The first is through trying to ban the app from the app stores, whether it's Apple or Google. That's created a lot of challenges. And so the other kind of larger legal precedent for this action is through CFIUS. The Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States has historically taken a very strong view on apps that maintain personable, identifiable information for US citizens, to include a recent action by CFIUS, whereby CFIUS dictated that the US app Grindr, its acquisition by a Chinese company, posed a national security risk. Grindr was sold by the Chinese company to a US company for over $600 million. And so there is a precedence here, but it's a complicated one.
I see. Wow. I never thought about all those ramifications. I have children. I can't imagine if their data, if the Chinese government had a hold of it, and what the risks that could be posed through that. So I really appreciate this kind of insight, Kit. It is so helpful. And hopefully we can move forward so that we can still have TikTok, but in a safer way.
Exactly. Thanks for having me.
Let's do Ukraine in a minute. US intel says that Russia is getting ready to annex parts of Ukraine, similar to how it annexed Crimea back in 2014. Annexing basically means one state unilaterally takes over a piece of land and claims it for themselves. This comes as Russia's foreign minister Lavrov, I'm gonna start calling him La asshole, said that because the West has supplied Ukraine with longer range weapons, Russia would now have to push further into Ukraine to ensure its own security. That's code for, we've now seized the land in the East and now we want more. Meanwhile, President Zelensky is fighting to make sure there are no pro-Russian puppets inside his own government. He just removed Ukraine's general prosecutor, as well as the head of Ukraine's security service, accusing them of collaborating with Russia. In fact, 651 cases of treason have been registered related to the offices these guys held. Separately, President Putin traveled to Iran, where he saw his new BFF, Iran's President Raisi. The US says that Iran is giving Russia unmanned weapons-capable drones, and that they could start training Russian troops on them as early as this month. And while that's not good for Ukraine, I will say it's a tad lonely and desperate when the Russian president has to ask the Iranian one for help. In a small piece of good news, though, Ukraine and Russia are nearing a deal to lift the blockade on Ukraine's grain exports. So that's good for Ukraine and also the countries that depend on that food. And Ukraine's First Lady, Olena Zelenska, visited Washington, where she urged Congress to send more weapons to help defend Ukraine, and she pushed for mental health support for Ukrainian mothers and children who have suffered from the war. The Drug Enforcement Agency's #1 most wanted criminal, Rafael Caro Quintero, was captured this week and arrested for extradition to the US. This is a big deal. This capture was not without its challenges. A bloodhound literally found this guy hiding underground deep in the mountains of his native Sinaloa state in Mexico. And 14 Mexican Marines died in the effort when a Navy Black Hawk helicopter crashed during the operation. The FBI has been after this guy for years, and he had a $20 million bounty on his head. Now, the capture took place just a few days after the Mexican president met with President Biden in Washington, so we don't know if this was part of some negotiation, but we're happy he's been caught. Quintero is the biggest marijuana dealer in the world. In fact, he has almost 1,500 acres of farming production, and he has paid off police, military, politicians, and judges across Mexico to keep going. He would ship trucks and planes filled with marijuana and Colombian cocaine into the US. Now, the DEA was after him because he's obviously a major criminal drug trafficker, but also because it was personal. In 1984, hundreds of Mexican soldiers showed up on his farm and arrested all the workers there and burned 8,000 tons of marijuana in what is the largest single drug seizure in history. They did this due to US pressure, so in response, Quintero killed a DEA agent who had infiltrated the farm named Enrique or Kiki Camarena, along with a Mexican pilot who had worked with them. Quintero brutally tortured them for weeks before they died, and since then, he's been the DEA's #1 target. He spent the next 28 years in 5 different prisons until he was released in 2013 because of an alleged legal loophole. But now he's been caught again, and it doesn't look like he's going anywhere this time. For drugging the United States and for all his violence, Quintero is on my shit list this week. I love this story. A 10-year-old Ukrainian girl is raising money to help Ukraine's military by playing checkers. Yep, like the game checkers. Her name is Valeria Yazova, and she's both the European and the world champion for her age group in checkers. She asked her mom how she could help Ukraine's army, and her mom asked her, well, what do you do best? And that's how she came up with the idea of setting up a folding table in Kyiv and challenging people to a game of checkers. If you lose the game, you drop however much you like into her donation box. And since she hasn't lost a single game, she literally defeats people in minutes, she was able to raise $700 in 9 days and still counting. She donated the money to a foundation set up by a celebrity activist named Serhiy Prytula, who has been raising money to buy humanitarian aid and equipment for the Ukrainian army. And she has received gratitude from soldiers and their families across the country. Now she's become famous and has inspired others to help. So people are reaching out to her mom on Facebook to see where they can play her, and others in her checkers club have also hit the streets to help raise money for Ukraine's military. She's even inspired me, so I'm going to do a good old-fashioned lemonade stand and bake sale with my kids to raise money for Ukraine so that they can do their part too. Consider doing yours. Geeks, before you go, I have a friendly reminder to do whatever you can to conserve energy and reduce your carbon footprint. Europe right now is going through its worst heat wave in history, with record-breaking temperatures like 113 degrees Fahrenheit in Portugal, for example. These are literally desert temperatures, and Europe is not built for the kind of air conditioning you see in Dubai or Texas. So wildfires have popped up in Spain, Portugal, the UK, and France, but also fires in houses and churches and the subway. And nearly 2,000 people have died just because of the heat wave in Portugal and Spain alone. This happens to come as Congress, as per usual, stalls on doing anything, and as Biden announces a new set of actions to cut greenhouse gas emissions instead. Who knows if these actions will be fast enough to help? And since these heat waves are becoming increasingly worse and more common all over the world, please do your part to help. Before you go, please like this video and do me a favor by clicking the subscribe button and the notification bell. And let me know in the comments below if there's something you want me to talk about. Stay fabulous, geeks.